Have you ever wondered why black men everywhere, across the globe, on every continent, are on the bottom? Have you noticed that? Did you know that? Well, I'm telling you that that's true. And I want to look at that today. I want to look at the bigger picture. We have our fights, we have our issues here in America, but what is going on as a whole? And again, the picture is not pretty for black men. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. And each and every week, we bring you a legal analysis of some story trending regarding politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, and I certainly hope it does, please like, share, subscribe, comment, and click the bell so you will be notified when we upload one of these videos. I want to take a global look at the plight of black men. Yes, I want to take a global look at the plight of black men around the world. So this is probably going to be at least a two-part series, at least, maybe even three, but at least two parts. Now, in the first part, what I will do is address the systemic oppression of African-American men. Then we will broaden our analysis and examination to particularly the African continent. All right? So first here, black American men, African-American men, and African men on the actual continent. And we probably will take a look also at black men on the European continent. Now, I have been to 3 different continents. Well, let me put it this way. I live on the North American continent. I have visited the African continent, and I have also been to the European continent. And trust me when I say that on all 3 continents, black men are on the bottom as a whole. Not every black man. There are some black men who are doing very well. But as a whole, black men, wherever we are, we're on the bottom. And that should be no shock to you. I don't know if you know that or not, but it is true. And in a moment, I'm going to take you to an article by the United Nations, and it will confirm what I'm telling you. Now, I want to say this up front. This is not to suggest the plight of black women isn't important. It absolutely is. We're in this together. Black men and black women, we're in it together. You are our queens. And me, being a girl dad, I especially know what that's all about. And I shout out my daughter this morning, Chloe Corbett. So, no, this is not about the fact that black men's situation is more important than black women. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not inferring that. I am saying, however, that when the men of any ethnic group are struggling, that's going to have a very deleterious impact on that entire ethnic group. I'm going to say it again, and it's just a fact. Whenever the men of any ethnic group are struggling, that's going to have an impact on the entire ethnic group, because obviously the men play a very vital role in the family and in that ethnic group. So when I talk about the systemic oppression of black men, I am definitely saying that has had a tremendous impact on our ethnic group as a whole. Now, before we get into the material for today, please Go to Amazon, grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice, where I talk about the education system and how it mistreats African American male students. I'm going to touch on that a little bit here in just a moment, but to go into detail and to get the information you need to be your son's strongest advocate, grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. You can get it at Amazon or from our website, impartpublishing.com. And thank you so much for all your support and everything that you're doing to help the Defiant Lawyers YouTube channel grow and reach people across the planet. All right, now, we're going to start with the definition. I want to make sure that we're on the same page. I want to explain to you what I mean by systemic oppression. So systemic oppression, systemic racial oppression is institutionalized racial discrimination where African Americans especially face consistent disadvantages due to biased structures, systems, patterns, and practices in society, and whites experience advantages. Now, let's stop there. What did we just say? What am I saying here in this definition? So systemic racial oppression is institutionalized. Let's first understand that. Obviously, America is made up of institutions, various systems. And those systems, those institutions, they have policies, they have practices, they have patterns. And those patterns and practices, those systems, those institutions in America and in many other European descendant founded countries, those institutions and those systems are favored toward whites. They are geared toward whites. They are made to advantage whites and to disadvantage blacks, and especially black men. All right. So when we talk about systemic oppression, we're talking about oppression that is embedded in the systems and institutions of a nation. That is exactly what we have dealt with. And anyone who disagrees with that are not being honest. America, in our Constitution, it is embedded. You know, this racism is embedded. Even to this day, there's still slave clauses in our Constitution, in court cases like the Dred Scott case, like the Plessy case, and many others. I could go into many others and show you where racism was put into the system to benefit whites, especially rich white men, and conversely, to disadvantage black men. All right, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I want you to understand, again, the definition. Systemic racial oppression is institutionalized racial discrimination where African Americans, especially, face consistent disadvantages due to biased structures, systems, patterns, and practices in society, and whites experience advantages. It's distinguished from individual racism or bigotry. Now that's important because not every white person is a bigot or a racist or a white supremacist. Not everyone. Now, I believe, along with Dr. King, that many, and most likely a majority of whites are. In fact, the data shows that whites have at least implicit bias, and that some are flat out racist and some are blatantly racist. For example, Donald Trump. He's just one of many examples of whites who harbor deep-seated white supremacy and white racism and anti-blackness. All right, so we're not talking about individual races. If you base your understanding on individual racism, you're going to be misled because there's some really nice white people in the country. You work with some, right? I mean, you are neighbors to some. You go to school with some who are really nice people. And oftentimes that calls black people to say, well, this race thing is overblown. I mean, people are just race baiting. Mr. Corbett is making this up because I get along very well with the whites that I know, the whites on my job, the whites that I attend school with, my white neighbors and white friends. I'm not talking about individual whites, individual racism. I'm talking about the structures, the institutions, and the systems that whites have created to benefit whites. So I'm not talking about individual whites. I have good white friends myself. All right, so we're not talking about that. We're talking about structural, systemic, institutionalized racism. Now, let's talk about the consequences of systemic oppression for African American people, especially African American men. What are the consequences? Here's some data. This is data. This is not my opinions. These are not my iterations. These are not my assertions and inferences. These are data points. This is research. These are studies of African American people from the womb to the tomb. And again, they're numbers and they are not, you can't deny them. I mean, they are creditable, okay, from creditable sources. So let's start. As soon as a black boy is conceived, what might his life be like on the trajectory that many of us African American men find ourselves on? Well, first of all, this says non-Hispanic blacks, African Americans, have a 2.4 times the infant mortality rate as non-Hispanic whites. So black boys are 2.5 times more likely to die during childbirth than other children. So we start out disadvantaged. We start out that way. If we make it, we start out, again, from a disadvantaged standpoint. This goes on to say non-Hispanic, black, African-American infants are almost 4 times as likely to die from low birth weight as non-Hispanic white infants. There it is. Almost 4 times to die from low birth rates. In other words, malnourished children that are not getting the proper prenatal care that they need. In fact, this goes on to say non-Hispanic, black, African-American infants had 2.9 times the sudden infant death syndrome mortality rate as non-Hispanic whites in 2020. And finally, in 2020, non-Hispanic, black, African-American mothers were twice as likely to receive late or no prenatal care as compared to non-Hispanic white mothers. I mean, that is right out of the womb. As soon as we are ready to come into the world, we start facing those disadvantages that are built into the system. Before we even get started, we already face disadvantages as soon as we leave our mother's wombs. That's assuming that we make it through that birth process. So we start out with those disadvantages. Disadvantages in this instance, based on those statistics that are in the medical industry, that are in the hospitals, that are with the doctors, the medical schools, etc. All right, let's keep working it. Black youth. So we made it through. We're born. We're here. But then watch what happens. Only 12% of black males are proficient in reading by 8th grade. In 2019, only 6% of 12th grade black males were reading at the proficient level, and only 1% were reading at the advanced level. So now the schools are failing us. The schools are not doing right by us. Now, I can almost hear you say, you're blaming the system, you're blaming whites, you're blaming racism for all of this. I'll discuss that in a moment. But you're right. You're right that the issues we see in the African American community for men, women, children, etc., are rooted in systemic oppression. No question. No question. We'll look at that in just a second. All right, let's go back. So 12% of black males are reading proficiently by 8th grade, and only 6% of 12th grade black males were reading at the proficient level, and only 1%, I don't want to just brush over this, only 1% were reading at the advanced level. 1%. This means a lot to me because, as you know, I wrote a book on this. I wrote a book on this very topic. I was a school teacher, high school chemistry teacher. And I saw these failures up close and personal. And it was the reason why I decided to write a book on it, because of what I saw and experienced as a teacher. Now, let me say this. A lot of what I share in this book, I used as a teacher. My kids were either first or second in the county for their test scores. First or second. And my young black male students, I made them sit in the front of my class, and I expected their best. I demanded it. And it didn't care to me what was going on at home for them. I had no control over that. I do believe that wholesome homes, I talk about it in the book, are really important where our children's academic prowess is concerned. But as a teacher, whether a kid came from a home that was supporting him academically or not, that was not something that I could control, but I could control my classroom. So I did not allow a kid's situation at home to become an excuse for me to say, oh, well, I give up on this kid. No. All kids are educable. All kids can learn. Couple them with the right teacher, put them in an effective school, under strong school leadership. It doesn't matter what their home situation is. If that teacher makes his or her classroom a sanctuary for that kid can learn. So my kids scored either number 1 or number 2 in our county. All right? I get passionate about the education piece. We don't have to have these low numbers. We don't have to have 1% of our kids, black male students, reading at the advanced level and only 6% reading at proficient level and only 12%. No, we don't have to have that. That's a school failure. That's a school failure. But what about the parents? Yes, it is great. It is awesome. It is better when parents are involved like that. But so what if they're not? The school still has to figure a way out to educate those children. All right? And that's the way I approached my job as a teacher. Because keep in mind, I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out in the 10th grade because of school failures. Yes, my home situation was not conducive to academic excellence. My father had a 3rd grade education. My mother, I think she may have graduated high school. But education was not the focus in my family. So quite naturally, I wasn't going to go to school under those circumstances and excel without some teachers, some guidance counselors, and others at the school, helping me and supporting me. And they did not. There was a reason why I dropped out. Anyway, black youth reading level. If a black male is not proficient in reading by the 4th grade, they only have a 20% chance of graduating from high school on grade level. And 85% of all juveniles involved with the juvenile court system are functionally low literate. So if a kid is not reading at proficiency level by the 4th grade, they have a 20% chance, only a 20% chance of graduating from high school. And that could also result in them becoming a juvenile delinquent. So these reading levels are critical. They are important. They are important. Parents, if you see your kid struggling in school, struggling with reading, get him help, or her. Get some help. Let me tell you what we used to do with our children. When our kids would come home from school, after they got a little snack or something, they had to do their homework. No TV. No TV. None. Well, back then they didn't have, phones and all that for kids. So it was either, watch TV or be outside. But our rule was when you come home from school, you get your snack, you do your homework, and then you read for an hour. They had to read a book of their choice for 1 hour after they did their homework. And then they could have their leisure time. And both of them graduated up there in the top 10% of their classes because they knew what we expected at home. I mean, flat out, period. And they are both very accomplished young people. And we didn't put them in a private school. They went to public schools. But we had to work hard to ensure the success of our children in the public school system. And you have to do the same. All right, now, let's go back. Some more information here. Black youth are almost 5 times as likely as their white peers to be held in juvenile facilities. And 42% of youth in placement are black, even though Black Americans comprise only 15% of all youth across the United States. That's a disparity. That's a disproportionate number. So black youth are 5 times as likely as their white peers to be held in juvenile facilities. And again, we've been told so many times that all of this is our fault. The first thing many of you think is, well, that's probably because black youth misbehave more than other students. You would be very wrong. That is not true. That is a white supremacist narrative that has been said and spoken so many times that even many of us black people pick up on that. But it's not true. Studies have shown, have disproved the accuracy of that talking point, of that assertion. Black kids are no more mischievous than any other student. So why are they ending up in juvenile facilities? Because of a host of other reasons that are rooted in systemic oppression. And if black students make up, or black Americans make up 15% of all the blacks in the country, why are there 42% of our youth in juvenile facilities? And I see it all the time. I used to represent and have represented hundreds of black youth in juvenile court. Hundreds. And when I used to visit them in the detention center, they were mostly black. Black and Hispanic. And then if you trace back what we've said so far, a lot of them are low literate. As the data says, that increases their chances of ending up in the juvenile system. And why are they low literate? Because most likely the school system that they attended. So just look at how this progresses. We first, as black males, got to make it into this world, because the chances of us dying during birth are higher, much higher than any other student or any other child. And then we go to schools quite often that are not qualified. We go to schools quite often that are poor performing, that have less qualified teachers, so forth and so on. So that then just puts us right on the path to juvenile delinquency. And later on, unfortunately, to prison. The foster care rate for African American male children is 10.73 per 1,000 compared to 5.24 for all other males. So there are more black male children in the foster care system than all other males, white, Latino, Asian, all of them. Why is that? Systemic oppression. There have been 400 years of systemic oppression targeted primarily toward black men in America. Black male high school graduation rate. If you see there the third row from the right, you see black, you see white, Hispanic, black, and Asian. The dark blue are the males. The light blue are the females. And if you look at that carefully, you see that black males have the lowest high school graduation rate of all those categories. Black male students have about a 76% high school graduation rate, which is lower than all the other groups, both male and females, white, Hispanic, and Asian. Black male college graduation rate. In 2022, 28.9% of black women ages 25 and older had earned at least a bachelor's degree, up from 15.4% in 2020. For black men in the same age range, by comparison, only 22.8% had earned at least a bachelor's degree in 2022, up from 13.4% in 2000. And I meant to say 2000 with the women. So there has been increase in college graduation for black men, but it still lagged behind everyone else, including black women. And that has a profound impact on black men's ability to go out and to secure careers and employment and so forth, right? Typically, the person who has the better education will be the person who ends up with the better jobs, with the better careers, who make more money, typically. Black male unemployment rate. In April 2023, there's a bit of good news here. In April 2023, the black unemployment rate fell to 4.8%, the lowest level on record for black citizens. That's amazing. In April 2023. And for those of you who say Joe Biden's policies have done nothing for black people, look at that. And for black Americans in the workforce, weekly pre-tax earnings surged 24.8% from the first quarter in 2020 through the end of 2023, according to CNBC. So black dollars increased. Today, the black unemployment rate is around 6%, and it's about twice that of white men. So it rose from 4.8% to about 6%. That's still much better than where it used to be. And it is also still twice as high of that for white men. So that leads right into, poverty leads right into this imprisonment rate. The imprisonment rate of black men has fallen by nearly 50% since 2000. That is awesome. Nevertheless, black men are still 5.5 times more likely to be imprisoned than white men. So we celebrate the progress, but we got to continue the protests when black men are 5.5 times more likely to be in prison than white men. And notice the drop occurred. Let me just throw this in here. The drop started occurring, the 50% drop since 2000, not since 2016. So that Trump and MAGA Trump supporters cannot claim that that's all the result of Donald Trump. That is not. That was long before Donald Trump had anything to do with the White House. This drop started way back during 2000, the year 2000. Black male poverty rate. The data shows that black men raised by low-income parents face twice the risk of remaining stuck in intergenerational poverty, 38%, as black women, 20%, in terms of their individual income. So black men raised by low-income parents face twice the risk of remaining stuck in intergenerational poverty. That is poverty from one generation to another. Whereas black women have a greater chance of breaking that poverty cycle, if you will. Why is that? Again, it's because of the systemic oppression of black men. And black men earn $378 less per week than white men and $125 less than white women, which is $19,656 annually, and over a 30-year period is more than $500,000. Now, grasp the import of that information. That $378 deficit in a black man's paycheck in comparison to his white counterpart over 30 years result in that white man having $500,000 more of wealth. That is significant, and it explains a lot. And for those of you who want to say that black men are the reasons they're unemployed disproportionately, or those other excuses you want to offer, what explains the lower pay, the lower salary, the lower wage? If the two are doing the same thing on the same job, why aren't they both getting the same money? That has nothing to do with whether the black man is this or that. That is just systemic oppression. And it has, again, a profound impact on a black man in his family, his ability to provide for those who depend upon him. All right, so now let's look at the black male death rate. Black men have the shortest life expectancy compared to black and white people, according to the CDC National Center for Health Statistics, both at birth and age 65. Homicide is the leading cause of death for black men between the ages of 0 and 45. Our life expectancy is shorter than white people at both birth and at 65. And homicide is the leading cause of death for younger black men. So we are dying disproportionately and prematurely. Black Americans were 9.3 times as likely as whites to be homicide victims in 2020. American Indians were 4.3 times as likely. Latinx were 1.9 times as likely, based on age-adjusted figures. So black Americans, especially black men, again, have a much higher chance of dying from homicide than every other group in the country. Now, this is a chart that just shows the death rate for African American men. At the very top, that is the line, the data points for black men, far above everybody else. And here's another graph that shows the homicide rate for black, American Indian, Latinx, white, Asian per 100,000 residents or people. So we see ours is much higher. So what is the point that I'm making here? Very simply, that from birth to death, we have the worst outcomes of anybody in this nation. We have the worst outcomes in terms of education, in terms of employment, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of the criminal justice system, in terms of poverty and wealth, the worst of everybody. Why? Systemic oppression. That's why. Systemic oppression. Now, this is going to conclude part one. In part two, we're going to look at the specific causes of this systemic oppression, how it works, how it manifests. And then we're going to conclude it with what we can do about it, how to fight it, how to counter this, how to push back. So I should be able to get through all of that in part two. I just want you to see that black men are dealing with some tremendous odds because we have been the target of vicious, systemic oppression for the last 400 years. That's just the way it is. Those are just the facts. We can't deny, for example, the first 246 years that we were chattel property. We can't deny the next 100 years, it was a Jim Crow system. So it's only been 70 years or so that we have lived in a nation where the laws were not just flat out written to oppress us. Whereas our white counterparts have been able to get ahead, far ahead of us in terms of wealth building and so on. 70 years for us. And that 70 years, I don't mean to suggest that although the laws were written, that it's been hunky-dory and we have had full equality. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just saying the laws were changed, but there's still that systemic racism that we still fight. And on top of that, our counterparts have had 400 years ahead of us. That's why you see the outcomes that you see with African American men. Now remember, I'm also going to look at the African continent. This is going to be good. Look at every video, please. Watch every video, share every video with those that you love and those that you're concerned about. You know, discuss them, share your comments here. We love your comments. If we disagree, we may take out of our time to push back, but we typically just read them and keep it moving. But anyway, I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers, and this is what we do. We bring you this type of legal analysis of stories having to do with politics, policies, personalities, and or pop culture. So please subscribe, like, share, comment, and until the next time, peace.